White versus Tito Ortiz. Like, this is one of the great rivalries in the sport. I must tell you, in full confession, I never knew where it stemmed from. Like, I never knew the genesis of it. I felt like I watched it all play out, but I knew there was some part I missed. Dana clarified that. Listen to what he said. He said, look, here's the problem with Tito. Tito's just not a smart human being. He's not intelligent. He's very effing stupid. Let's start right there. Now, again, I don't know what's got everybody angry, but I feel like this helps to sum it up. Look, when you see Tito speak publicly, and you can Google that, I don't have any beef with Tito anymore. Tito, you know that you're stupid. Tito used to do to me. We'd have big fights coming up. This is the part you got to pay attention to. We'd have a big fight coming up on a Saturday night. Tito would be the main event. The deal would have been done for months. Tito would call up and say, I'm not going to show up if you don't give me another 150 grand or whatever his number was. He would do this regularly. I would go crazy. Tito was the kind of guy that would step over dollars to pick up dimes because he thought it was smart, but it was actually the complete opposite. That's the end of the quote. Dana White goes on, talk about Chuck Liddell and some of the things with the relationship in the UFC. And I got to tell you, there was a guy that did that called the Ultimate Warrior. Now, I never knew that that was going on with Tito. From what I know of Tito, that's actually not something he would pull. I was a little bit surprised when I read that. Whether I like Tito or not, I've always found him to be a pretty straightforward guy. Ultimate Warrior, you guys remember that? Ultimate Warrior was the biggest thing in wrestling. He overtook Hulk Hogan to the point that the night that he pinned Hulk Hogan, there'd only been 3 guys to ever pin Hulk Hogan clean on television. Clean means without interference, where the referee doesn't get involved or the manager's distracting you and the steel folding chair comes over your head. Ultimate Warrior Jim Hellwood, rest his soul, but he was that big. He was the Intercontinental Champion. One thing that never happened in wrestling, you never had the Intercontinental Champion take on the World Champion. Even though the IC was the second biggest thing, they never found their way to each other. In fact, it was a non-stated policy that they wouldn't come after each other. So then you'd have a whole division of guys trying to be IC champ and a whole division of guys trying to be world champ. So wrestling for the first time ever says, to hell with that policy. Let's put them together. This guy's got a belt. This guy's got a belt. Great for a poster. Walk them out there. And that is what constituted the Warrior versus Hulk Hogan. Now, I'm going down memory lane a little bit with some nostalgia there, but it was a Survivor Series. And of the entire card, the biggest draw on the entire card was the Ultimate Warrior. Even if he was going into tag team action, his presence mattered. And I think that that makes sense to you guys. I don't think that I have to add power to that, but I will tell you I've been there firsthand. My buddy Justin and I went to a pro wrestling event that was in Portland. It was non-televised. You had to have tickets to be in attendance. And our favorite tag team was the Demolition. One half of the Demolition Smash doesn't show up. And the Fink comes out at the very beginning of the evening and he informs us the tag team Demolition was not here tonight because Smash couldn't show up. Partnering with Axe will be the Big Boss Man. So it ends up being the Big Boss Man and Axe, and they go and do the tag match. It was different, man. It was a blow. When you're a fan and that's who you come out to see, it's not a great feeling. Ahead of time, I can't go as far as to tell you that I would have asked for a refund and just stayed home, but it would have been considered. It was a really big blow. Survivor Series is on a much different scale because it's pay-per-view. So now you've got an audience who's bought this, who's stayed home. They played Sundays. That's all you're going to have going on Sunday. You got the biggest star. He's there. He's healthy. He's backstage. But the Warrior goes up to Vince McMahon and says, I'm not going through the curtain tonight unless you give me $1 million right now. Now, that wasn't $1 million payout. That's whatever the payout and whatever the contract and whatever the guarantee, whatever the points, whatever the merchandise, you're also going to give me $1 million. And so Vince did it. He had a sold-out arena, and he had fans all over the world, some of them with face paint and wearing medallions that were tuning in to see the Ultimate Warrior. And I'm telling you the story in the words of Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon says, I wrote him the check, and then I waited for him in what's called gorilla position. Gorilla position is a WWE term. It means right behind the curtain. There's a monitor there. Vince can actually watch the matches. Then when you come through the curtain, if you had bad spot, he's going to grab you right there. Before you ever hit the locker room, he's going to dress you down. He's going to tell you what you did wrong, or maybe he'll give you a pat on the back and tell you what high spots you had. But that term, gorilla position, Vince waited in gorilla position. So he scratched out the check for $1 million. Warrior goes out there. Dun, 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 dun. Right, the whole crowd goes crazy. Everybody gets what they're wanting. Vince waits for him. Warrior walks through the curtain, and Vince fires him on the spot. Then has security remove him from the building. So one of the bigger questions to Vince is, why didn't you cancel the check? If it was just a check, it wasn't cash, it wasn't a wire, Bitcoin wasn't a thing back then, why didn't you cancel it? And Vince said, because I told him I'd pay it to him. I never paid him another check. I fired him. I released him. It changed his life. And whether I liked the deal or the terms or the way it came about, we still made a deal. And this was Vince talking. And I only share that with you because that very much is the same way that the UFC would work. I didn't know that Tito was holding them hostage. And to hear this for 100 grand or 150 grand, it wouldn't really matter if you added a zero or subtracted a zero. You're now talking about the principle of the matter. Like if I'm putting your name up in lights, and by the way, it happens to work, you can convince yourself it's because of your skills, and you can convince yourself it's because of your charisma, but we'll never actually know. I could have grabbed somebody else and made sure that they had a beautiful record since I'm doing the matchmaking. I could have done somebody else and seen if the audience found them to be just as charming and just as interesting. We won't actually know because I chose you. I put my money and my efforts and energy, and I can only do it in one direction. I did it in your direction. And when it happened to work, which means my guesses were right, and the bet that I hedged ends up coming up good, and you try to take it from me, we're now not partners. In fact, we're not working together at all. And so it's a very tough spot. It's one of those that would be very hard to forgive. I'm only telling you this. This isn't my typical let's give Tito a hard time session. I was surprised. But I was also grateful from the dramatic standpoint. I never knew that. I never knew what the beef was between those two. I knew they used to get along really well. And I know Tito was an absolute top draw. And for a period of time, maybe the top draw. And Tito's one of the very few guys who you can say for a part of his life was the best in the world. You can't do that now. The fighters that you have now that have the belt, you don't actually know if they're the best. You don't actually know. There's no competitive architecture in place. You just sworn up, down, and sideways to me 1 week ago that Sean Strickland couldn't beat Israel Adesanya. You just swore up, down, and sideways that he shouldn't even be given the opportunity. You just swore up, down, and sideways that he's ranked number 6 in the world, which proves 5 guys are better than him. I'm just sharing for you, like, this is a really hard sport to actually know, but there was a time in Tito's life where he not only beat everybody, he dominated everybody. There wasn't somebody that could go close with him. He understood cardio. He was way ahead of the curve on chemical enhancement. He understood cross-training. He wanted it really bad. I have really positive thoughts towards Tito's memory, at least in that regard, for sure. But one part of the story is I didn't know. I didn't know where they got off the rails. And it turns out Tito might have been inspired or influenced by the Ultimate Warrior.